All right, welcome to week 3 of Living Free. A little bit more, just a little bit. Welcome to week 3. All right, cool. So we're going to start with a few announcements. We'll move into class rituals, and then we'll welcome our guest instructors for today. So first, a few upcoming Living Free events. So again, if you're taking this course for 3 or 4 units, part of the requirements are that you attend at least 2 Living Free events. All the events are open to the public. We had our first one, no problem. We had our first one on Monday with Adrienne Marie Brown, and I'll be bringing some of the learnings from that. Oh, yes, it was incredible. Later on in the slide, but I just wanted to give an overview of some of the things coming up. So the first event, which is ongoing on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 p.m. in the Harmony House, is Black Women Dreaming, which is facilitated again by IDA visiting artist Amara Tabor Smith. On Sunday, May 7th, which I just want to highlight again because in your syllabus it's a different date. The correct date is Sunday, May 7th. Dr. Stephen Murphy Shigematsu will be initiating a tea and ceremony with a tea master. That's actually limited to only 16 students, so please RSVP by sending me an email. On May 11th, we have RISE, which is Radical Indigenous Survivance and Empowerment, which will be half talk, half poetry performance, invoking two-spirit identity, Indigenous practices for healing, survivance, and resistance. That'll be at 5 o'clock at the Harmony House. Am I going too fast? Next up on May 18th, which is our next Living Free event, will be facilitated by the Ratchet Dharma Collective, who will be with us week 7. They're going to be doing an hour-long community-guided meditation from 10 to 11 at the Harmony House, and then from 12 to 2 will be embodied healing and community workshops led by all women of color. So that's May 18th. And then our final Living Free event is a concert and installation by Jamil Woods from her music from her latest album, Heaven. So again, this also is a date change, so please just note this one as well. It's Friday, June 2nd at 10 p.m. And it's going to be at the Bing Concert Studio, which is in the Bing Concert Hall. Cool. So we also have some amazing additional events that IDA has sponsored. These are not Living Free events, but they are incredible opportunities to keep this dialogue going. Again, all the events are open to the public, but we just want you to know that Joan Morgan is going to be joining us on May 11th. Joan Morgan is the mother of hip-hop feminism. She's going to be talking about her iconic book, When Chicken Heads Come Home to Roost, which is coming into a reprint this year. It's going to be at Robley Residence Theater, so the dorm with the theater inside the dorm. We'll be there to open the doors, and that's going to be, the talk begins at 3, and it goes from 3 to 5. We also have a week-long Kiki, which is sponsored by some of our IDA fellows as well. That's going to be a documentary screening of Kiki, which is a history, or contemporary history of Vogue, ballroom culture, and dance. They'll also be having voguing workshops from 2 Bay Area iconic Vogue master teachers, as well as a screening of Paris is Burning, which is the historical kind of reintroduction of contemporary Vogue and the way that we imagine it. So that will be not this week, or not this coming week, but the week after. And then also, if you enjoy these kind of classes and events and you'd like to be a part of the team, the leadership team that puts them on and that engages with these issues at a very deep level, we do have IDA Fellow applications that are open now on diversityarts.stanford.edu, and the due date for those are May 8th. We also will be having an open house, not this Friday, but next Friday, so if you want to learn more about how you can get involved, hang out with me more maybe, hang out with Jeff, hang out with some great folks that are in this class that are current IDA fellows. We'll be hanging out, listening to music, amazing performances, not this Friday, but next Friday from 2 to 5 at the Harmony House. Dope. Some other dope things, critical response papers are due next week. So the first of 2 critical response papers, if you're taking the class for 2 units or for 4 units, Any scale in between, we also require 2 critical response papers. So I'm just going to go over the guidelines, which are all in your syllabi, but just to reiterate. So 2 critical response papers for 2 to 4 units. They're 2 pages, single-spaced, font size 12, Times New Roman, just to get us all on the same page in terms of format. And they're due next Wednesday before midnight after class. So you'll be just expected to cover or consider the things that we've talked about up until that point. Nothing after, of course. And then we just ask that you write your last name and your first name just in the title description of the document that you upload, just so we know that it's yours. Cool, so the rubric, I just want to go over one more time, but it's also in the syllabus. So papers critically engage and consider the prompt. And I know there was a question about, because there are a few different questions, but it should consider 1 or multiple prompts. It's up to you. You don't have to answer every question, but they're just there to guide you. They're loose guidelines. But you will be given a credit for how they critically engage and consider the prompts. They should cite and or reference at least 4 readings. They should consider the work of at least 2 guest lecturers. And again, that's from next Wednesday onward, upward. They should include original thought and or analysis about the course themes. And of course, the paper should be polished, complete, grammatically, and structurally sound. And just to reiterate some of the questions. So what does it mean to embody health? How can we explore health and healing as a creative process? How does the work of healing justice aid in contemporary movements for racial justice? What is the role of art and creativity in addressing individual and collective trauma? So again, all the classes will be posted on the website 1 week after. So week 2 will be available, week 1 is available, week 2 will be available by tonight, and then similarly week 3 will be available next week, week 4. Beautiful. Are there just any questions about any of those things? Okay, cool. All right, so we're going to move into our class rituals. And I'm just going to cut the lights really quick. This week's topic is, what is health? As we highlight the precarious way that health is equated to a desirability, which I like to highlight before we start with our class rituals, sometimes manifests itself in fat phobia and the idea that large bodies are inherently unhealthy. As we unlearn and relearn new frameworks for health, I'd like us to begin our class ritual with a little bit of video art from one of my new favorite folks. This is by Lizzo, and it's called My Skin. And so I'm gonna play this video, and then we'll have the video move us into about 15 minutes of sitting with ourselves, as we've come to do each week. So we'll spend about 15 minutes and a little bit of guided meditation immediately following the video. With the sound of the bell, we'll end, and I'll introduce our guest and themes for this week.
Learning to love yourself, like learning to love your body, is like that whole journey that I feel like every person, but more specifically women, have to go through. So I feel like doing this is a good way to kind of break through and kind of seal the last chapter of the learning to love it, just loving.
What's deeper than the darkest, best kept secret? Beneath the surface we could let it bring us together, or it could tear us apart. Oh, I'm filled with it. I gotta love with no conditions, though it's hard to re-envision time and time again. Even when it didn't matter anymore. The most beautiful thing that you ever seen is even bigger than what we think it means. Reflections in our bloodstreams. It's even bigger than. I woke up in this. I woke up in this. In my skin. I can't wash it away, so you can't take it from me. My brown skin. Yeah, real world, big girl girl meets world. A crazy position. Now your dreams is your mission, huh? Staring in the mirror, realizing wishing work. Now all I wish is for a chance to get my cancer board. I got a family tree that's worth praising the Lord. Mama looking like the second, woo, look at God. Sister like a soldier, hold it down. Southwest gon' hold it down. I love you, don't forget it. Your beautiful black masterpiece, boy. They don't make brothers like you. Make it happen with that black girl magic. The hat trick off of what we must do. I woke up in this. I woke up in this. In my skin. I can't wash it away. So you can't take it from me. My brown skin. Yeah. Part of me just left a message to the city. Words stuck between my teeth, so gritty. Paying for each minute I'm seething. A black girl mixed with a little bit of Sacagawea, yeah. I pocket subpoenas, I swallow my pride and my ego. I wear my flaws on my sleeve and my skin like a peacoat. I see someone like me ashamed to be. And honestly, I'm fed up with it. Try to send it up like a FedEx. I'm wondering what they say next. Can't pretend to not hear it. It's your beauty, they can't have it. It's yours, they can't have it.
I'm done with the struggle. I just wanna enjoy my body now. And maybe appreciate my skin.
So I invite you to close your eyes if that feels good for you. If not, you can keep your eyes sort of halfway open. And we're just going to situate ourselves and our bodies in this present moment. Feel free to sit square on your chair and sit with dignity with your shoulders back. A comfortable but present position. And I'm going to begin our meditation with just a few words from Mia Mingus. Deep breath in. Out with air. I would like to invite you to breathe deeply. To remember why you do this work for liberation. Think of the communities your work is in service of. Hold them in your mind. Feel them. What are your wishes and dreams for them? Let's remember why we're here, what brought us into this work of daring to create movements that value all of us, daring to assert that, yes, we matter. Let us ground in all those who have come before us and honor them, all the freedom fighters who have made this moment possible. Everyone who has wanted something more than criminalization, isolation, shame, self-hatred, and invisibility. Let us ground in and honor all of the people who are currently fighting for us, for all of us in this room, each and every one of us. And finally, let us ground in and honor those yet to come, the people who we do this work for. We hope we can give them intact communities. We vow to be able to pass on concrete, substantial tools and learnings to them, and wish for them a deep sense of pride, belonging, and dignity in who they are and all of their complexities. And we'll just be and slow down for a few moments. So I wanted to bring in some of the work of Adrienne Maree Brown, and I'm just going to give a couple of framing quotes as we begin this class, and then I'll introduce our speakers for this afternoon. So Adrienne, one, just set the stage for just so many of the terms that we've been discussing through class, and so I wanted to give you one of her definitions for transformative justice, which we've heard a lot about during this class. So transformative justice, she says, lives on the other side of the spectrum of punitive justice. If punitive justice says this person stole something, they are a thief, put them in jail, they are bad. Transformative justice says, no, let's look at and transform the conditions of poverty that would lead a person to steal in the first place. Transformative justice, she reminds, urges us to dismantle systems of oppression rather than dismantling each other. Yeah, thank you. And she is also a somatics practitioner, and so I just wanted to give a bit of a definition from her new book about somatics. Somatics is about fighting for rather than fighting against. It is a methodology for transformation that helps us to understand that change doesn't come simply from thinking differently. The process involves shifting what we understand, what we can feel, and what we practice, reconnecting us to the incredible data and resilience of the body, not only the mind. We don't practice to feel good, she says. We practice to feel more. We practice to feel more. And finally, emergence. If Mama Nature teaches us nothing else, she teaches us that diversity is absolutely necessary for survival. Now, she doesn't mean some surface diversity, but a system where every single being is doing their part, pulling their weight. If we are committed to organizing sustainable and liberating social movements, they must be diverse, pulling especially from those who are most impacted instead of suppressing their voices or using them as props. And finally, from Mia Mingus, which is from our readings from this week, Leaving Evidence on the Medical Industrial Complex. Oppressed communities have had a long and complicated history with the medical industrial complex, from the continued targeting of disabled bodies as something to fix, to the experimentation of Black bodies, to the violent attempts to cure queer and trans communities, to the ways that criminal and mentally disabled are still used interchangeably, to the ways that health is often equated to desirability. And fleshing out what the medical industrial complex is, we are naming a system. We are calling attention to the systematic targeting of oppressed communities under the guise of care, health, and safety. And with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker for this afternoon. So I'm going to introduce you a little bit, Jeff. Just a little bit. Okay, so with us today, I'm super excited. We have Jeff Chang. Yay! Alongside Dr. Stephen Murphy Shigematsu, who of course is our co-instructor for this class. So a little bit about Jeff Chang, for those who don't know. Jeff is the executive director. It's going to be very brief. Jeff gets his bio read like 3 times a week. So Jeff Chang is the executive director of the Institute for Diversity in the Arts, IDA, of course. He is a hip-hop historian and writes extensively on culture, politics, the arts, and music. And his latest book, which made me cry more than once, is We Gonna Be All Right, Notes on Race and Resegregation, which he may talk about a little bit today, and also is out now. He's going to be talking a little bit more about the racial implications of the healthcare system using the term called health equity, which he'll explain more in a few minutes. After Jeff's talk, we'll move into Stephen's talk, and then we'll open it up for conversation with the class. So without further ado, please welcome Jeff Chang.
Thank you. Thank you. Whoa. Oh. Okay. Good evening. How's everybody doing? Good. Okay. So first of all, thank you so much, Alan. Thank you so much, Sensei Murphy Shigematsu. Thanks to Mark Gonzalez. These have been 3 of my mentors in learning a lot more about health. I'll just admit it. I'll just put it out there. I wasn't somebody who really thought a lot about health for many years. I was part of the generation that sort of was about going hard until you couldn't go anymore, right? And then if you broke down, that was seen as a sign of weakness, right? And so I went hard as an activist, as an organizer, as an artist, as a journalist. And so I found myself in 2000, I was covering the Republican National Convention for Russell Simmons. And so I was out there in the streets. It's the summertime, 90 degrees, 100 degrees all the time, and a lot of protests, a lot of the beginnings of what we now have called the anti-globalization movement. And so I was out there all day, every day, on the streets, and then going into the hall to cover the crazy speeches that they were giving inside the arena afterwards. And every day there was a massive protest. And every day the police came in really hard, right? And so one of those days, actually, there was a highway protest, and they shut down the highway system in downtown Philadelphia. And the police came out, and they had horses, people, they were swinging at everybody, all kinds of stuff, all kinds of mayhem. I was there with a videographer, and I'd been a veteran of many riots, and so I had to kind of pull her away from the swinging batons and all this other kind of stuff. And that was the kind of week it was. And so I was working really hard. I was working around the clock. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating that well. I was completely dehydrated. And the last night of the convention, after George W. Bush's acceptance speech, right, which was crazy. And then Shaka Khan came on and sang, and I was like, Shaka, what are you doing? It's a Republican convention. And she actually says it's the one moment that she'd like to take back from her entire life. She'd like to take that moment back. But that wasn't what I was going to talk about here. I was going really hard, and I woke up that night. I was staying at my cousin's place in downtown, and my heart started racing. And I was getting dizzy, and I couldn't really stand up, and I was rushed to the ER. And that was the first time I started thinking about my health, right? I was probably 34 at the time. And they kept me in. They had drawn blood. They thought I had a heart attack. I hadn't had a heart attack, but by the way that my blood was showing, they said, you have enough of this kind of proteins in your blood that it's almost as if you've been hit by a car and run over. You shouldn't really be here. As it turns out, I have this sort of long-term condition that hasn't really been diagnosed. It's a mystery. They call it Syndrome X. So I say, I'm an X-man. But I've been living with this, right? So I've been living with this, and I've had to learn a lot more about this. And so this has kind of fueled my work. If you start thinking about death, then you have to start thinking about life, right? And I think that fast forward, right, to the last 3 years, right, and the movement for Black Lives, right, which has forced us to think about life and has forced us to think about death, right? And in some ways, what it's done is it's really forced the question of health to the forefront. And so I've been thinking a lot about race and about place, about segregation and resegregation. That's what this latest book has been about. And over the last year, I've had the chance to be able to build with a lot of activists and organizers and artists from all across the country who've been working on health issues, specifically around health equity, thanks to a group called Policy Link that's based in Oakland, California, but has a national kind of policy scope. And so what I'm going to do today is to sort of present some of the stuff that we've been talking about around the country, around questions of health, and to think about race, think about place, think about health, and also talk about the healthcare system, how it helps us, how it fails us really more. And so we're going to start with this question here. What does it mean to be healthy? And this is a question that Sensei and I are going to try to approach in much different kinds of ways. I'll do the sort of policy type of thing, the sort of nuts and bolts numbers type of thing, and a little bit of that. And then Sensei will take us in a completely different, much more fun direction. So just put up with me for another 25 minutes and it'll be all good. All right? Let's start with this. We'll start with this image, right? The picture of diversity. Some of you have seen me use this image before, right? Obviously it's Grey's Anatomy. And the way I've used it in previous talks is to talk about how we get beamed, right? The picture, the image of diversity, which actually hides in many ways the reality of inequity, right? And we could talk about that all day, and I can. But the other part of it is really interesting to me. I was looking back at this image again, and I thought, you know, the image of a Happy Rainbow Hospital has been very popular since the 90s, right? You think about the predecessor TV shows to this, like ER, right? And other ones, Scrubs, whatever, right? There's always these multiracial casts. They're multiracial in very benign ways. People aren't actually expressing identity. They're just being multiracial together, multicultural together, right? They're just sort of there, right, as window dressing, right? The picture of diversity. But this sort of Happy Rainbow Hospital. So it normalizes this idea of diversity on the one hand, but also normalizes the idea of health care as being taken care of by the folks here in the healthcare system, right? So the question is this the way to health, right? And the reality is that the healthcare system is based upon, in the US, and we'll get into this in terms of actual numbers in a second, is based upon treating crises, right? It's not about prevention and wellness and all that kind of stuff. It's like you are there after midnight, you heard George Bush speak, it's haunting you, you've been trying to sleep, you can't sleep, your heart's racing, you're getting dizzy, you got to go to the ER, right? And that's what the healthcare system was for. And then for many years, for over 2 decades now, I've been in and out of doctors' offices, you know, trying to figure out what's going on with all this kind of stuff, right? So is this the way to health? And so we're going to talk about health, we're going to talk about the healthcare system, because obviously when we think about health, we think so much about the healthcare system, right? And so let's start here with the definition of health. This is Merriam-Webster. I pulled it off the web, right? Health, the condition of being sound in body, mind, or spirit, right? A condition in which someone or something is thriving or doing well. A general condition or a state, or a toast to someone's health or prosperity. Health, right? And so the other definitions that you probably saw in your readings, like other folks are talking about health as a state of balance, right? Or a state of harmony, right? Of being right in so many ways, right? And so we could talk about healing as a process of bringing back into harmony, bringing back into balance, right? These are just sort of definitions to start with. And of course, healers, when they're healing, true healers, are not just bringing into play what's happening with the individual. They're thinking about the conditions and the context and the sort of social milieu, the environmental, the cultural types of questions that are at play as well. And so here's where we start to see how systems really deeply impact our health. So let's go for 2 more definitions, and then we'll start or maybe 3 more, and then we'll start kind of going into the numbers. So two more sort of definitions to work with. Health disparity. This is a term of art now used in policy circles and in ways of thinking about public health, right? Differences between specific population groups in the incidence, prevalence, mortality, or burden of disease and illnesses. And then on the other hand, health equity, right? Health equity. Thinking about health now as connected to everything, right? Health equity, right? And so health equity is when all people, regardless of race, neighborhood, or income, we could add all kinds of other factors in there. Gender, sexuality, we could add all kinds of things in there, can attain the highest level of physical, mental, economic, and social well-being, like the rappers put it, can I live, right? Health equity, that's health equity. So health equity is asking the question, why do health disparities between groups exist, right? And achieving health equity requires remedying inequalities all across the board, right? So it's not just about treating the patient, it's about thinking about historical and contemporary injustices, right? It's thinking about eliminating the kinds of healthcare disparities that take place. It's a larger frame that allows us to get at root causes, right? Or what they call the social determinants of health. So the social determinants of health, here's another term of art, right? The social determinants of health, and this is the World Health Organization's definition, are the conditions in which people are born, grow, live, work, and age. These circumstances are shaped by the distribution of money, power, and resources at global, national, and local levels. So now we're taking the big picture. This is the biggest possible picture to be able to look at the question of health, right? The social determinants of health are mostly responsible for health inequities, the unfair and avoidable, very important word, avoidable differences in health status seen within and between countries, between communities, between people. Right? So here's a policy wonk's idea of how the social determinants of health play out or can be seen, right? The physical environment, right? Things like public safety, right? The social environment, transportation questions, right? Education, obviously, employment, health systems and services, housing, income, and wealth. One of the things I think is actually missing here is culture, right? You would have expected me to say that, right? But access to culture, to cultural practices, to traditional foods, these are things that could be included in the social determinants of health. But all of these things, right? You can imagine, right, how all these different types of things might impact somebody's health. If you have to take 4 hours to get to your job every day, it's going to wear on you, right? It's going to wear on you. It's going to make things much more difficult if you're raising kids, right? Or if you've got folks to take care of and you're a single parent, how do you take care of that kind of stuff, right? And on and on and on. We could think of a situation in all of these different types of cases where these things can impact. And so here's the other sort of thing here, and where we bring in sort of place and race here, right? We have to think about the social, the economic, the physical environment, and also the service environment, right? And these are different ways that people have kind of mapped how to think about these different types of issues. And so let's come back to this definition of health in a revised kind of a way, right? Health is about balance. It's about harmony. It's about one's overall quality of life. It's not only determined by a lack of disease or illness, or the ability to have treated disease or illness, but by access to opportunity as well, right? By access to opportunity. And here's a really important point. Health depends on the choices one makes, right? If I drink lots and lots of Pepsi, I not only will feel bad about myself. Oh, a side digression. I live in Berkeley, and there was, of course, you heard the riot this weekend between the white supremacists and the fascists, anti-fascists, excuse me. And one anti-fascists, yes. We got that on camera, right? Anti-fascists, white supremacists, and the anti-fascists. And at one point, and this is the funniest detail I heard of all. At one point, they started throwing cans of Pepsi at each other. Yes, they did. It was really funny. So what was I talking about? So health depends not only on the choices one makes. Do you decide to spend your Saturday at a white supremacist rally throwing cans of Pepsi at them, or drinking too many of them, right? That was the original point I was trying to make. But one makes choices based on the choices that are available, right? If it's cheaper to buy Pepsi at the corner store than it is to buy water, right? Or to buy high sodium foods, right? Than to actually have healthy alternatives, right? If it's cheaper to go and get your dollar meal, right? Than to be able to make your own food, like, those are your choices that you're making, but it's based on the choices that are available to you, right? And so to improve health for all, we have to attend to racial and social inequality. Now let's get to the numbers here. And these are slides that have been provided for us from PolicyLink, from Dr. Anthony Aitan, who was at one point the director of the Alameda County. He was a health director for the Alameda County and is now sort of the nationally recognized expert on questions of health equity, and works for the Cal Endowment as a leader there, right? This is looking at life expectancy at birth in Alameda County, right? You have the top line here is white, the bottom line is black, right? And what we see is life expectancy, the gap between white and black, has actually only grown over the last 50 plus years, 60 plus years, from 1960 to 2005. All right. If we break it down, this is what the geography looks like. Now we're getting into race and place, okay? These neighborhoods in red are neighborhoods where life expectancy at birth is lower than 74.3 years. The green areas are areas where life expectancy is higher than 80%, right? And it shows what we'd expect, knowing the Bay Area, that in the flatlands, life expectancy is lower, that up in the hills, it's higher, right? And if you really want to break it down, right, we're talking about these red areas. This is South Berkeley, actually, where I live. It's West Oakland over here, and this is East Oakland, right? And if you want to map it in comparison to the poverty rates, it maps perfectly. If you want to get deeper about this, it maps perfectly to this map from the 1930s of bank redlining. Okay, bank redlining, right? West Oakland, East Oakland. Even before the highway was driven through West Oakland and East Oakland, right? And in part, this map is because is the reason why they could drive the 880 through that area, right? So, again, right? We could go back here. Let's see. Life expectancy, poverty, redlining, segregation and resegregation. If you want to break it down by poverty group, right? This is a sort of scatter graph of life expectancy based on the poverty rate, right? Life expectancy in years. As the poverty rate goes up, of course, we have shorter life expectancy. Anybody here from Chicago? Okay, so you'll recognize this map, right? This is a map of the train lines in Chicago. And you can see here, South Side, life expectancy 69 years. Like, West Side, 72 years. Cubland, 81 years and 85 years, right, on Michigan in the Miracle Mile, right? And out here in the southwestern suburbs, 79. Okay? Dr. Aitan figured out what the cost of poverty is in the San Francisco Bay Area, that every additional $12,500 in household income buys a year of life. Buys a year of life, right? And it plateaus once you start making more than $150,000. So anybody working on tax policy, there you go. There's your break, right? But it's similar all across the country. in Baltimore, in New York City, Philadelphia, in the Twin Cities, in Colorado, in California, in Cuyahoga, right? It's a different factor, but it's always the same. And so let's break it all the way down to life expectancy at birth by race. These are the best numbers that we have, the most current numbers that we have going back to 2000. And what I did here was I added American Indian numbers and API numbers from 2009 to 2006 to 2010. They track non-Hispanic white and non-Hispanic black on a regular basis, on an annual basis. But these numbers, they have to do estimates based on a whole bunch of sampling and that kind of thing. But I wanted to show this so you see the whole picture. Right? So these numbers are not exactly the apples to these oranges, but they give you a really good idea of where we're at. Right? For all races, life expectancy is 78.7. For non-Hispanic white males, it's 76.4. For non-Hispanic white females, it's 81.1. For black males, it's 71.7, non-Hispanic black males. For non-Hispanic black females, it's 77.8. For Hispanic males, it's 78.8. Hispanic females, it's 83.7. And again, not exactly apples and apples, but 73.7 for American Indians and Alaska Natives, right? And for APIs, it's 86.3. Let's go to premature death, right? This is death before the age of 70 or 65, I think. This is for people in the age group 25 to 39. And these are the death rates that we have from an article that actually just came out earlier this year, 2017, right? This is the premature death rate for white men, white women, Hispanic men, Hispanic women, black men, black women, API and Alaska Native men, API and Alaska Native women, American Indian men, and American Indian women, 25 to 39. This is it for from 40 to 49. Rates of premature death, right? And this is it for 50 to 64. Now there's a couple of things to actually pull out of this, right? That if you look at the rates of premature death all the way up to the last 10 years, right? It was lower for American Indian men and women than it was for black men and black women. American Indian rates of premature death are rising. The other group for which premature death rates are rising are white men and white women, right? And so in the last 2 years, there's been a spate of articles that's come out about what's happening with the rise in premature death for white men and white women, which is unprecedented in the so-called first world, right? Everybody's talking about it. There's conferences being held about it. There's front page articles that's being held about it. And a lot of it has to do with the rise in inequality. This is what everybody believes. The huge rise in income inequality and wealth inequality. And so that's led to a rise in suicide rates, a rise in addictions. It's led to all kinds of deaths that can be tied to prescription drugs. And sort of behind that, of course, rising rates of depression, right? But nobody's been looking at this particular question for American Indian men and American Indian women, where the same things are happening. There are rising rates of suicide, rising rates of opioid addiction, and so on and so forth. And so this gives us a new way of understanding this question, right? Of understanding these phrases, Black Lives Matter, Native Lives Matter, right? Thinking about literally premature death and life expectancy, right? That's why Black Lives Matter. That's why Native Lives Matter, okay? And so I want to go back to a quote that Mark brought up in the first class in a different kind of way, right? Mark quoted Ruth Wilson Gilmore talking about power, right? Ruth later rewrote that quote, and I think that this is something that we're talking about right here when we're getting to the question of health equity. Racism specifically, right, she thought about it for a while, and she went from power, thinking about power as the subject here, to racism specifically. Is the state-sanctioned or extra-legal production and exploitation, remember that, right, of group-differentiated vulnerability to premature death. Okay? So I wanted to just return to Ruth Wilson Gilmore's quote there as a way of being able to understand this type of question. So let's talk about the healthcare system, right? So we look at life expectancy for countries. Japan and Korea are over here. Western Europe's over here, right? This is life expectancy in years and the amount of money people are spending in each country, right, per capita on healthcare, right? We're spending a whole hell of a lot. We're like way the hell out here. And our life expectancy is way lower than countries like Korea, right? Belgium, Denmark, France, Australia, Italy, right? Norway. If you look at the spending on healthcare, this is the US. Per capita, spending about $8,000 per capita, as opposed to Turkey and Mexico spending about that much, right? And where's Japan? Here's Korea, here's Finland, here's Japan, right about the middle of the graph, okay? So the total health care investment, though, in the US is much, much less. What this shows is both social service expenditures and healthcare expenditures, okay? And if you look at that, if you add that together, then the US drops to about the middle because social service expenditures have been cut dramatically over the last 50 years, okay? In the OECD, for every $1 spent on healthcare, about $2 is spent on social services. Not so in the US, right? And it turns out that this is the huge factor, right? The ratio of health spending, to social spending to health spending was significantly associated with better health outcomes, prevention, wellness, right? Less infant mortality, lower birth, on questions of lower birth weight, premature death, right? Longer life expectancy, right? And even when you took the US out as its outlier, this crazy outlier, that was totally true. And so Dr. Aitan estimates that 80% of what influences your life expectancy happens outside of the healthcare system, right? It's happening on the social service side or the social, maybe the social justice side. So the disparities are just the tip of the iceberg. Health disparities are just the part of the iceberg that you see, that's above the surface. It's all these other things underneath that, right? Access to nutritional food, the quality of life in your neighborhood, stress, right? People being pushed out of school, bad schools, poverty, social exclusion. These are all the things that are driving things. And so when you look at the model of healthcare, right, what happens is you have somebody having risk factors and behaviors. He's eating a lot of cheesesteaks and not getting a lot of sleep, right? I wasn't smoking, but I was really eating bad, right? And then, oh, I got to go to the ER, healthcare access, right? And then they find out, oh, okay, you got a disease, it's ongoing and that kind of thing. And then you've got to sort of resolve this, right? And ultimately, this is the end of the line, right? So this is the back end. The healthcare is the back end. And the stuff that happens downstream are genetics and the health knowledge that one has, right? And how they use it, really, right? But think of it this way. There's all these things that are upstream from that, right? There's discriminatory beliefs, right? All the isms you can imagine. There's institutional power, right? And how that separates us and segregates us, right? There's social inequities, neighborhood conditions, segregation, workplace conditions. If you took the metaphor of school, right? You could talk about, oh, not showing up to school. Intervention happens, right? Now, ultimately, the intervention happens and either gets better or you fail and you drop out, right? If this was like the only thing of it, right? If we were only focusing on this in our school system and not focusing on teaching, right? We would be expecting to get bad outcomes all the time, right? And so what happens is the inequities are happening downstream, the disparities are happening upstream, but we're only dealing with the stuff after the disparities have been created, right? The inequities in the social side of it lead to health inequities and lead to health disparities, right? Again, this is the medical model. This is the socio-ecological model, looking at prevention, looking at wellness, looking at treating and taking care of the population before that. Another way to look at it is that there's conditions, and these are the consequences. So we're over here on the back end with our picture of the Happy Rainbow Hospital, taking care of things all on the back end. And so here's my last slide, and then I'll introduce Sensei and get out of your way. One way to kind of think about how to change things is we've got to shift the narrative around this, right? This is where the cultural piece comes in, right? And that hopefully can lead to more policy and take away the differences around place, right? Reduce segregation, right? And increase power that would lead to better policy. And then we get a virtuous spiral, as opposed to the downward spiral that we kind of see happening here. All right, I'll stop there and bring up Sensei.
Okay. I think we've been sitting for too long, so if you would like to, and if you can, if you'd like to just, we'll do a very brief, what's called in Japanese kiko, which is the movement of energy with your body and with your breath. So, I'd like to begin with something that my grandmother liked to say, and it's a very simple phrase of arigato kara hajimeyo, and it literally means let's begin with thanks. But the word arigato in its original meaning evokes this sense of wonder, like what a wonderful thing, what an amazing thing that's happening, that I am receiving something from you or from God. And it's about the wonder of being a receiver. Right? And so it causes you to reflect. It's often done just before you eat, but this sense of gratitude for just being here, and a sense of gratitude for this moment, that we have this moment. And to me, that's what this moment feels like. It's a sense that if you can feel the wonder that we are here together in this moment. So we had talk about what it means to be in a society in which some people live longer than others because they've got more money. And you can see about how much there is health inequities, health disparities, and how much work there needs to be done on this level of systemic, structural change. Also, we're not going to get into it today, but also in the sense of a paradigm shift from what's called a scarcity paradigm to a synergistic paradigm. And so a lot of healing resources are really can be shared synergistically, and this is something that societies have known throughout time. But in our present society, there's a real scarcity paradigm of who gets the medicine and who doesn't get medicine. Who gets care and who doesn't get care can be bought. But for the rest of the time we have, but for about 40 minutes, I want to focus on something a little different, which is to bring it into ourselves, right? To think about health and healing for ourselves and our communities. What does it mean when we look at ourselves and you reflect inside, who are we to talk about health? Right? Who are we to go into our communities and talk about how to heal? What do we know about that? What can we learn about that? How can we reflect on our own lives and think about what does it mean to be healthy? What does it mean to heal? So some of you know, Jeff and Alon call me sensei, but not necessarily there. So, well, I guess you guys are kind of young, huh? But the word sensei simply means, if you look at the original characters, one who comes before you. So it has this sense that many cultures have of the elders. Right? It's somebody who simply lives before you, and therefore is someone who hopefully you can rely on for some kind of guidance, somebody who you can go to. And there was a time a few years back when I thought, well, if I'm not really young anymore, and I'm certainly not cool, then maybe I can be old and wise. And that seemed like a good alternative. And then I realized, I don't know, I don't feel that wise actually, so maybe I can just be myself. And which means that when you're yourself, even a sensei is simply somebody who's down the road a little bit. And so when you're down the road, you come across and come through different things that you don't come through when you're earlier down the road, or you may come across them earlier. But most of you have not faced midlife. And this is the way I felt for a while when I was at midlife, this sense of being in this forest, lost in a forest of darkness, and not seeing the way out. Could not see, how do you get out of this forest? And there were many things happening at the time, but it was, one of them was I would wake up in the morning and the first thing I would hear was a train whistle. And when I'd hear the train whistle, I would immediately think, that's where 5 kids from my son's high school committed suicide. 5 kids in 1 year walked in front of a train right near my house. The first one was the day before high school began. My son came home from the first day of high school and knew that his friend had died the day before high school started. So I would wake up with that reality. You hear this train whistle blowing. You wake up and you think, oh my God, I'm alive. And then the thought comes, this is right down the street here. There's a place where 5 kids died. 5 kids walked in front of trains and ended their lives. And then I'd come to campus and I'd look at the lifeless faces of Stanford students, and not all of you, those other students, And then you think about the state of the world and think about, what am I doing? What kind of a life do I have coming to Stanford University? And what meaning does it have to be here? When the world is literally dying, right? People are on the streets dying, getting killed, losing years of their lives just because they don't have enough money and resources to buy good health care. And the sense of hopelessness came over me. How do you get out of this? How do you feel worth in what you're doing when you have to face the limitations of what it is that we're doing? So I felt like I needed my own sensei. And the first person I thought of, 2 people came to me. And this is my grandmother, and this is Grace Lee Boggs. And I thought of these two people are going to help me. And the first thing that I said, my grandmother pointed out to me was, if you look up at the top 2 characters there, it says Kurayami no Mori, and it means the forest of gloom. So this darkness and gloom is in those 2 words. And the first thing my grandmother said was, look at those characters, and what you see is there are 3, I can't get up that high, but there are 3 suns in there. There are 3 of the characters for the sun. And she said, so even in the darkest forest, in the darkest sense of you feel this gloom, there's sun. The light is actually there. You just can't see it right now. You have to find the sun. And then Grace said something, she said exactly these words. Each of us needs to undergo a tremendous philosophical and spiritual transformation. And that sounded right. But I also thought, well, how do you do it? And I thought of Howard Thurman. Some of you might know this quote, but this sense, when you're thinking about what should I do? What can I possibly do in the world with the immensity of the kinds of problems that exist, about so many things that need to be done, how do I know what I'm supposed to do? And so this sense about, that's too hard a question. Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it, because that's what the world needs. People who have come alive. So I had this feeling like, well, I need to come alive, but how do I come alive? And then my grandmother had this, again, reminded me, like, remember who you are. Remember that this was your great-grandfather was a samurai who told her that this is how I get up in the morning. I start my day by contemplating death. Right? And this is what Jeff was talking about too, this sense of when you confront mortality, that can, we think we avoid it and say, "Wow, that's so depressing, that's morbid, I don't want to think about it, it's too scary." But if you can do it, you may find that it actually gives you this sense of being alive. So when you contemplate, the samurai would contemplate, I'm dying. Right? I will die. I may die today. I don't know. But when you come out of it, and you open your eyes and you say, oh my God, I'm still here, still in this body, I better get my ass moving, right? I don't know if the samurai used that word, but but you realize, you contemplate death, you actually go through your dying process, and then you come out of the meditation and you're alive, and what have you got to do? You've got to get going, right? You've got to get moving. But how do you know what to do? And the samurai would do very minor things, right? The sense of when you feel, if you do that meditation, you don't fear death in the same way. Right? And then you also, when you open your eyes, you open them to some very clear realities, right? In saying that sense of arigato kara hajime-yo. Let's just begin by appreciating that we're here, the wonder that we are here together at this moment. So I want to give you just a little taste of Grace Lee Boggs in case you haven't met her.
Yes, but where is the sign of the movement today?
I believe that we are at the point now in the United States where a movement is beginning to emerge. I think that the calamity, the quagmire of the Iraq War, the outsourcing of jobs, the dropout of young people from the educational system, the monstrous growth of the prison industrial complex, the planetary emergency in which we are engulfed at the present moment, is demanding that instead of just complaining about these things, instead of just protesting about these things, we begin to look for and hope for another way of living. And I think that's when the movement, I see a movement beginning to emerge because I see hope beginning to trump despair.
Where do you see the signs of it?
I see the signs in the various small groups that are emerging all over the place to try and regain our humanity in very practical ways. For example, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Will Allen, who is a former basketball player, has purchased a 2.5-acre land with 5 greenhouses on it, and he is beginning to grow food, healthy food, for his community. And communities are growing up around that idea. I mean, that's a huge change in the way that we think of the city. I mean, the things that we have to restore are so elemental. Not just food, and not just healthy food, but a different way of relating to time and history and to the earth.
And a garden does that for you?
Yes. A garden does all sorts of things. It helps young people to relate to the earth in a different way. It helps them to relate to their elders in a different way. It helps them to think of time in a different way.
How so?
Well, if you just press a button and you think that's the key to reality, you're in a hell of a mess as a human being. That's where this is growing beyond capitalism.
So it is that this woman who marched and agitated and argued in mass movements and social protests for over 70 years has come full circle to find seeds of hope in small places where people work quietly and patiently on every imaginable front.
We work on trying to change policies for homeless people.
I think information is power.
They get little public attention, although they're concerned with the most basic human needs.
We want jobs that actually empower us, and make it so that you actually have a say in what happens at your workplace.
These days, Boggs works through what's known as the Beloved Community Initiative to encourage people like this in cities across the country to see themselves as crucial to how democracy works and for whom.
You didn't have to come here this past weekend. You're 91 years old. Why did you come?
Because I think the initiative that I am part of, the Beloved Communities Initiative, is identifying and helping to bring together small groups who are making this cultural revolution that we so urgently need in our country. And I see this as part of a pilgrimage which human beings have been embarked on for thousands and tens of thousands of years. People think of evolution mainly in terms of anatomical changes. I think that we have to think of evolution in terms of very elemental human changes. And so we're evolving both through our knowledge and through our experiences to another stage of humankind. So revolution and evolution are no longer so separate.
But the economic system doesn't reflect this evolution. Outsourcing of jobs, the flight of capital, the power of capital over workers, all of that the system isn't catching up with this.
Well, you don't expect the system to catch up. I mean, the system part of the system. What I think is that not since the 30s have the American people, the ordinary American, faced such uncertainty with regard to the economic system. In the 30s, what we did was we confronted management, and were able thereby to gain many advantages, particularly to gain a respect for the dignity of labor. That's no longer possible today because of the ability of corporations to fly all over the place and begin setting up and so all this outsourcing. So we're going to have people are finding other ways to regain control over the ways they make their living.
A lot of young people out there would agree with your analysis, with your diagnosis, and then they will say, what can I do that's practical? How do I make the difference that Grace Lee Boggs is talking about? What would you be doing?
I would say do something local. Do something real, however small, and don't diss the political things, but understand their limitations.
Don't diss them?
Disrespect them.
Disrespect them?
But understand their limitations. I mean, politics, there was a time when we believed that if we just achieved political power, we would solve all our problems. And I think what we've learned through the experiences of the Russian Revolution, all those revolutions, that those who try to get power in the state become part of the state. They become locked into the practices. And we have to begin creating new practices.
What will it take for this next round of change that you see as promising? What would it take?
It takes discussions like this. I mean, it takes a whole lot of things. It takes people doing things. It takes people talking about things. It takes dialogue. It takes change in a whole lot of ways by which we think.
Do you see any leaders who are advocating that change? I mean, people that we would all recognize, anybody we'd all recognize?
I don't see any leaders, and I think we have to rethink the concept of leader, because leader implies follower. And so many, not so many, but I think we need to embrace the idea that we are the leaders we've been looking for.
Grace Lee Boggs, thank you very much.
So when I thought about how to come alive, I thought, the sense, what do you do? And she gives very practical advice, right? And says, do something local, do something real, do something in your community, do something that's right in front of you that you can actually do. Right? And then I thought about how do you get hope, right? And to think about how much courage it takes to actually get involved in something and to put yourself on the line. And how that courage can be found in stories, right? In narratives, cultural traditions. And so that's the importance of connecting to who you are. The other thing I was really impressed by was this amazing activist talking about the importance of growing gardens and how that is so connected to coming alive. To actually nourish something with your hands and to see the growth. And then if that's a food, to have that become part of your body, right? And so that very basic sense of being part of life, part of the whole life process, and how much that's symbolized in something like the growth of a garden. So the second principle that I feel like I learned from these two elders, the one is connect. Right? The other one is, the first one I called coming alive, this one is called connecting. How do you connect to other people? How do you connect to your ancestry, to your family background, to communities? And with this sense that, Einstein talked about this delusion of consciousness, in which we feel we're trapped in these bodies, we're trapped in this consciousness, and we feel that we are separate, and we fear others because we fear that they might hurt us because they're separate from us, they're not connected to us. But that this is a kind of delusion that we feel because of our limited consciousness. And one thing we know, though, in a very mundane level, is the degree to which our lives depend upon so many other people. Even if we can't have that real clear sense that we are somehow one, we can have this sense like we know that we exist because of the love and kindness of so many other people. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. And we can get that sense, and that gives us some feeling of connectedness. We also know, if we know anything about human history, is that throughout most of human history, when we've been hunters, gatherers, that healing takes place in community. Healing is not an individual activity where one person goes off, like in our culture, you go to CAPS, and you're sitting there one-to-one with this other person. That's got very limited ability to spread health and healing around the world. Right? The people at CAPS have had like 10 years of college or so, right? And how many people have these PhDs and MDs, and how many psychiatrists can go out there and heal the world? Very few. Right? But everybody has healing power. Right? We're all healers. We all have the ability to heal, and that's been the way that communities have healed throughout time. People come together and they heal each other. You share that healing resource. The healing resource becomes a synergistic element that can provide healing for the whole community. So we know we heal in community, but we also know that we don't easily feel a sense of connectedness to others. And so I want to just show you this very short video introducing this word of Salbona from Zulu, and what it means about seeing, actually seeing each other.
Salbano is one of those primal words when people were still able to really see each other. In fact, the word says, we see you. So it's not a single eye person. That my eyes are connected to a dimension of reality we call ancestors. So my seeing includes my ancestors. My seeing also includes the divinities that are part of the celestial spheres of reality. So Salbona says, we see you. And the response is, Yebo Saubona, yes, we see you too. Because it's a dialogue. Seeing is a dialogue. It establishes you as a witness to some phenomena that can also be a witness to your own presence. But when two human beings meet in this gesture of Saubona, the acknowledgement is we see each other. That becomes an agreement because we're obligated from that point to affirm the reality that seeing has empowered us to investigate our mutual potentials for life. So it invites us to communicate. Why are we, if we're seeing each other, why are we here at the same time? What is this moment of time given us to be able to do? So it's an invitation to participate in each other's life. Seeing Saubona also obligates a person to give to each other what's needed for that moment of life to be enhanced. For me, now seeing represents the question, how can I be, or how do I have to be in order for you to be free? Because I think our present civilization has taken away freedoms from human beings, not because one culture oppresses another, but because we lost the imagination of what sight meant, of what these inner capacities really mean. So for me, it's important to reestablish the question, how do I have to be as a human being for someone else to be free? You tell me, and I would explore that possibility. Because I think inwardly we all know what the prerequisites are for our own freedom. Yeah. It's a type of consent. It's a type of agreement we need in order to exercise freedom. We can't do it out of self-interest. Freedom can't be pursued out of self-interest. Freedom must be a mutual gift from one human being to another, recognizing that if I limit one person's freedom, I limit my own. That we can't take away something from someone that is so mutually tied to the state of existence. Freedom is not from something or to achieve something. It's a freedom to be present with.
So the very basic quality of seeing someone else is something that we rarely practice in daily life. We rarely see each other. The root of the word respect in Latin is simply to see. So you think of that such a basic thing, to actually see other people, to see other people as an act of mutual respect and recognition of our oneness. So I invite you to practice. Kind of like some of you who go to church might know how you do this in church. Unfortunately, I like to actually get everybody to go around the room and move around and do the Saubona to each other. But if you could just, if you'd like, to do it just to some people around you, and to actually see each other, even if just for a moment, to give them the greeting Saubona. It's more fun when you can move around, but so I've done this for all kinds of sizes of groups, and what happens is as people are moving around, the smiles come out in the faces. It's just beautiful, and it's people start out and they're kind of hesitant and tentative and feel self-conscious, and then it's just amazing, to actually see what happens, that simple act of seeing another person, and that the connection that comes from that, the sense of we are one. And this is very different from a sense of what we think of often as freedom, right? and freedom as autonomy. And instead, to think of freedom, as John Powell puts it, as freedom is found in connectedness. Freedom is found in embeddedness. Freedom is found in community. And the more communities we have, the more freedom we have. And this is very, a whole different way of thinking often from the way we feel today in our society. That we want to be free, we think that means we want to be absent of ties and responsibilities. But if you put it this way, this is the way humans have thought about this for so long. We get the freedom from being connected. That eliminates the fears that we have that we are alone in this world and that we're vulnerable to attack by others. If we can feel this sense that freedom comes from being connected and embedded with others, we lose that fear. But we all know that we have a fear of freedom as human beings. Right? And that comes, as Freire has put it very clearly, perhaps from this sense of the oppressed internalizing the values, the ways of the oppressor. And the oppressors in our societies have had clearly fear, right? The fear of others, and therefore need to keep them oppressed. And this is something that I think we need to look in ourselves too, to see how we have absorbed these fears, how we absorbed these values that in turn make us afraid. And this is like when this is before you, Jeff. Yeah. But this sense of connectedness and mutual support is something that has existed, throughout different movements, but the movements often don't come together because the people in those movements are so concerned about their own issues that it's very hard to cross the borders and to feel this sense of mutual support and connectedness, but that's where we feel really coming alive. The work of Gloria Anzaldúa has really been influential for me, and to see these ways in which connectedness is something that we all strive for. And the sense of including, not using differences to separate us from others, and certainly not glossing over those differences, but self-defining, not to exclude either, but self-defining as an act of inclusion. And to see the categories that we construct of race and gender, to see them as more permeable and flexible. That, when she first edited the book in the early 1980s of This Bridge Called Our Back, it was very different, and it was really a time to make those borders even, among ourselves and among our own groups. No men could contribute to that book. No white people could contribute to that book. But by the time she did another anthology in the early 2000s, she was writing like this: let's cross those borders that we've constructed and let's see who really are the allies, who are the people who are really with us, and not confine ourselves to these kinds of borders that keep us apart and weaken us. To empower ourselves with the kind of spiritual activism that helps us to cross these borders. And the third principle I want to mention is compassion. And so this is something that Grace Lee Boggs has emphasized, the sense of when you're awakening, there's a compassionate recognition of this inseparable interconnection for ourselves, our bodies, minds, and hearts, but also between ourselves and all the other selves in our country and in the world. And so this identification with those who suffer is a way, certainly, and that's the original Latin meaning of compassion, to suffer with. Can we suffer? If you suffer with someone, is that a way that you will find healing and health in that sense of compassion? Feeling compassion is not that easy for many people who have been victimized by other individuals, by whole nations, states, governments have done things that make it really hard to heal. And I want to show just a short video that will put one of these kinds of conflicts in context for us.
This whole week is not about us, it's about the survivors. Yes, there are issues that we continue to face, and we must continue to face those challenges. And we have to all, at some point, reconcile and work together, and that includes all of us.
About 140 years ago, the Government of Canada embarked upon a process of taking children away from their families in Aboriginal communities and placing them into so-called educational institutions. But we know from our work at the Commission, as it will be revealed in our report, that for the first part of the existence of those schools, very little in the way of education actually occurred. The schools were actually centers of indoctrination. We know that, with the intention being to take children away not only from their families, not only from their mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, but the intent also was to take those children away from their culture, to take them away from their language, and to indoctrinate them into a different culture and a different language in order that they would be assimilated and become like everybody else in this country.
There were 25 Indian residential schools in Alberta, more than any other province or territory. Alberta is currently home to about 12,000 residential school survivors, the second largest number in the country. Indian residential schools were a tragic history that changed the lives of children and had impacts across generations.
The government persevered for 130 years, and it took that long for people to realize that it was never going to happen, because Indigenous people are resilient people. And at our commission, we know that part of the obligation that we have is to look at what happened, to gather the truth, to talk to the survivors and have the survivors put on the record their stories, so that those stories would be the foundation for a dialogue about reconciliation in the future, so that people will understand why it is that there are families that cannot function properly back in Indigenous communities, why there are so many people who do not know who they are, who cannot stand up and explain to you what it means to be Anishinaabe, or what their teachings are. They don't know their creation stories because it's never been taught to them. They don't know who their heroes are. They've never been taught about Tecumseh and all of the other leaders of this world who have stood up for our people in the past, because those stories have never been given to us.
We must remember the people that are still surviving, but also remember the people that have left before, because they're still in our heart, and we must continue to support the families, the youth, and especially the survivors.
I too personally experienced violence as a child. This real hurt made me a victim too. I believe that we can and that we must support each other to no longer be confined or defined as victims who continue to hurt ourselves and those that we love, but rather as strong survivors. Having done the hard work, we can, we must, and we are choosing to end this cycle. It starts with forgiveness within our own families. Forgiveness to not hold on to the pain and the suffering. And most importantly, to not pass this on any longer.
We all know that forgiveness is one of the hardest things for us to do. Bell Hooks writes about how forgiveness and compassion go together. But it's difficult to know, how do we hold people accountable for what they've done wrong, and yet maintain hope in their humanity, right? And to believe that they have the capacity to be transformed. Grace Lee Boggs talked about this as embracing that power that you have within yourself and how there's, because the problems that we have in the state and the system seem so overwhelmingly powerful, how do we get out of this sense that we are victims? And how looking at that life in that way really disempowers us. But also asks us that to all challenge ourselves to move beyond that, because the times are really dangerous and threatening. And if we wallow in this sense of victimization, we don't act, we don't move on. And the sense here, she's also saying, is what she calls responsibility. Right? Responsibility, the sense of responsibility only comes if you feel that you are part of something. And if you separate yourself from it, you no longer feel the responsibility. So that's what she was talking about in the system. Don't totally diss the system, but accept your responsibility, that you're a part of it. For me, it's really hard to accept that I'm part of Stanford. And I have this feeling like every day I come onto this campus, I die a little bit. To think that this is who I am, this is my world, this is all I can do. You're wonderful people, but you probably have the same feeling, right? What the hell are we doing here, right? There's a world to change out there. But I feel like what she's saying is, the world's not just out there, the world's right here. Right? We're here, right? We're part of the world. We're part of this society. Do something local, right? Do something right in front of you. What can we do? What's right here in front of us? Because this is our society. This is our community. Right? And we're responsible for it. Therefore, we feel the sense that we have something to do, something way that we can act. Anzaldo also talked about this sense of moving from this focus of what's been done to us. Right? But there's this urgency that we have to embrace our agency now. And she brings it beyond a sense of just what we are doing to each other, but beyond this sense of this country, looking at what we've done and will continue to do to other countries and to the earth itself. King also talked directly about this sense of being victims and how we can move beyond that by looking at our own vulnerabilities, right? And our own sacredness as human beings, and not to look at this vulnerability as something that is a weakness, but it's something that is really key to unlocking the door to ultimate reality. So if we can feel our own vulnerability, we can feel our own imperfection, our own impermanence, we can connect to everyone else's, because we're all in that same state. Right? And if we can feel that, we'll feel that connection, we'll feel that healing, the healing power that's in that. Bell Hooks goes to this, asking us also to look at our wounds as not something that has a permanent scarring, but it does mark us, but it's also something that we can allow the mark of our suffering to become in our own hands. Can we take that into our own hands and change it, use it? Can we become someone who gives our life in some ways? We're all not courageous enough to give our lives completely. Dag Hammarskjöld was the second Secretary General of the United States. He was on a peace mission. His plane was shot down, they think. But he wrote this about that we're not permitted to choose the frame of our destiny, but what we put into it is ours. He who wills adventure will experience it according to the measure of his courage. He who will sacrifice will be sacrificed according to the measure of his purity of heart. And so when we fashion ourselves to be revolutionaries, this is questions that we confront. How far are we willing to not just adventure, but how far are we willing to sacrifice? Does that sacrifice come even to the sense of using our own life? It's Easter season. Some of you are Christians. You may have had this kind of reflection recently about reflecting deeply on what Jesus was doing in the garden, was reflecting on, is this my purpose, right? Is this what I'm called to do? Is this what life is calling me to do? And saying, if it is, then I'm responding. I'll do it. You know, I care that much about my fellow humans that I will give my life. But few of us do that. Some of us give our lives in other ways, and we feel like that's not what we're called to do, to martyr ourselves. But maybe there's a way in which revolutionary writers and artists and musicians are engaged in a kind of similar struggle to know how can we use our lives, and maybe it's better to stay alive. Right? Maybe there's more to do. And what I need to do is not to martyr myself, but I need to find my way of expressing, my way of contributing to a cultural revolution. And maybe that's through your abilities as a writer or an artist or a musician. Many of you feel that you have your own wounds and traumas and scars. And another way to think about how you heal is you heal yourself, you also can heal others. You can heal communities. You can be part of healing communities. And so this idea that you don't need to be whole, because we're never going to get whole. We're always moving towards wholeness. That's what healing is. And you're never going to be perfect. And you can't wait until that time to think, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough to heal. You're good enough. We're good enough right now if we can own our own capacities and abilities and to feel this kinds, engage in our own healing every day. We can become wounded healers. We can't wait until we're perfect, because we will never be. But we can engage in our healing every day, and we can engage as part of a healing community. I think I'll stop here. And what I was hoping to do was to simply give you some. I don't seem to be much good for anything anymore in my life except for kind of just living and then sharing what I'm living. And, hoping that that's enough in the sense that trying to help you to understand how I heal every day. And even somebody further down the road is continually trying to heal. Your parents, your grandparents, no matter what age they're at, they're still engaging in this process of healing. And you can all help them. It's a mutual process. Right? It isn't just looking towards the elders. The elders also can look to the youth for healing. So thank you.